For historical context and more information, see the description below.
Some years ago, Robert Updegraff wrote an article in which he was lauding the progress of civilization, and he pointed out how quickly things change. He said that in 20 years, new professions, new services will develop that at that time were only embryonic ideas in the minds of imaginative people. Then he went on to say that we must realize that a generation belongs to do with what it may that which has been given to it by God, and that the people, the situation, and the very time serve those who understand them and who command them. Those last words especially caught my attention. This matter of commanding the times, where we're living in a period that isn't easy to command. Probably it has been ever thus, but there seems to be a particularly congested traffic jam of events and circumstances that are foreboding. The problems of the ghetto, racism, the poor have taken on menacing stature. There's a matter of justice, law and order, and the very courts that at one time we felt were rather sacred in this nation are themselves under attack. There is the matter of inflation. There's a matter of congressional reform. Always in the background, there's the roar of the guns and the casualty lists that are coming from a very unpopular Vietnam War. Let us remember that war is still going on in spite of the cessation of the bombing. They're not easy times to command. And in this year of our Lord, 1968, we're challenged with the task of electing those who will have the responsibility of doing it. Especially are we to elect a president. And we know that he would better be good. What a frightening responsibility it is. As I thought upon it, my mind went back to Paul's statement in the second letter to the Corinthians. He was trying to impress on the people the tremendous responsibility of being a Christian. How can any person ever rise to the immensity of it? And so Paul asked the question, who is sufficient for these things? I'm borrowing these words partly out of context for this sermon. Who is sufficient for these things? After the Federal Convention, Benjamin Franklin was stopped by a woman on the street. And she asked Dr. Franklin, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy? He replied, a republic, madam, if we can keep it. A republic, madam, if we can keep it. Who is sufficient for these things? I'm sure when I'm finished that a good many are going to say that the minister was talking this morning about the very man I was going to vote for all along. One of the great difficulties that we have in a democracy and in all other things, of course, is that people only hear what they want to hear. And anything of praise that is spoken of certain qualities in personality, this constructs the hat that goes on their candidate, and anything which is derogatory, of course, goes on the other person. The purpose of this sermon is to remind ourselves what we have a right to expect in a president who can command these times. It's not going to be a simple task. And we should also remind ourselves that the greatest country in the world should have the highest standard in the world for its president. We should go to the polls measuring our candidates against that standard. Where does he measure up here? Where does he measure up there? And if we should choose the man who falls the farthest short, our children and our children's children are going to have to pay for it. It'll be frightening business if he's only a politician. If he's only the kind of person who follows the wind as it blows. If he is that, these times are going to ride herd on him. We ought to go to the polls with a thought-out standard that guides our voting. In many instances, we're going to have to do some guessing. But let it be as thoughtful guessing, as prayerful guessing as we can make it. Let us be confident that it's also essential that the mark we put on the ballot will depend very largely on how conscientiously we have done our homework. Who's sufficient for these things? In the first place, not only for this election, but for every future election, we must choose a man who has the courage to be a leader. This nation has been experiencing something of a different trend from Russia. In Russia, the man in the street and in the office and in the study and in the library keeps his eye on the Kremlin. If a writer is not to be molested, his book must pass the tests of the Kremlin. If the musician is to have his music played, his work must please the party leaders. All this is not good. One doesn't write nor compose for the ages under conditions like that. But we've had the opposite thing happening here in America. Our leaders keeping a constant eye on the polls, which are supposed to express the opinions of the people. And we've made a kind of game of it, somewhat the same as we would make a game of guessing the football scores on a given Saturday. There's a strong case for the position that the polls have done a lot more harm than good to the American system of government. Their influence has been most apparent on all the candidates, and it has come to the place where one wonders whether on Tuesday he is going to vote for a man or for a comedian. And he's wondering, too, if the candidates are going to be standing for the same things on Wednesday as they were standing for on Monday. I suppose some of them might say that the end justifies the means, we have to get in. But the difficulty, of course, is that usually the means become the ends. he who is cheap in his promises is going to be just as cheap in his performance. The man who will command these times will recognize that his experience enables him to understand some things that the public does not understand, and by the help of God, he's going to give leadership in those matters. He's going to have enough courage to stand up and say, here stand I, God help me, I could do nothing else. I would rather be defeated and stand by my principles than be elected and to have sacrificed those principles. If he is defeated, he'll have struck a great blow for integrity in leadership in this nation. He who is going to command these times must have this quality. He must have this quality, or we're going to have to wait for the leadership that will bring us out of this fog for some future day and from some future election, but not from this one. I suppose one of the least known patriots of this nation was James Pettigrew of Charleston, South Carolina. During the Civil War in the South, he stood for the Union, yet he retained the respect and the admiration of the very people who opposed him. The epitaph on the stone above his grave is an everlasting testimonial to character. Woodrow Wilson asked for a copy of it when he was going through the difficult hours at Versailles. Here's what it says. Remember, here was a man living in the South, but daring to stand for his principles. Unawed by opinion, unseduced by flattery, undismayed by disaster, he confronted life, and get this phrasing, he confronted life with antique courage and death with Christian hope. In the great Civil War, he withstood his people for his country. But his people did homage to the man who held his conscience higher than their praise. And his country heaped her honors upon the grave of the patriot, to whom living his own righteous self respect sufficed, alike for motive and reward. Any questions? There's no substitute in the wide world for integrity. And we would better cast our vote for the man that before God we feels has the most of it. If we don't, the promises that he's making before the election will all be rationalized away before 6 months have gone. I believe, too, that he must be a man with a deep awareness of the human needs of America. As a young man, the greatest president this country ever saw was present when a black woman was sold on the slave block. And he said if he ever got a chance to hit this business, he would hit it hard. And he did. 5 years before the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln wrote a letter to Joshua Speed in which he said these words: as a nation, we began by declaring that all men are created equal. we now practically read it, all men are created equal except Negroes. When the know-nothings get control, it will read, all men are created equal except Negroes and foreigners and Catholics. When it comes to this, I shall prefer emigrating to some country where they make no pretense of loving liberty. To Russia, for instance, remember this was in 1855. To Russia, for instance, where despotism can be taken pure and without the base alloy of hypocrisy. Abraham Lincoln. He had a feel for human needs and for the solution of human needs. And there can be no great president without that. We can talk as we please about law and order, and we must have it. But let us make sure that we're not more sanguine about law and order than we are about justice. Go back to that great verse in Micah. What doth the Lord require of thee? But, and what's the first command? Not to keep law, not to keep order. What doth the Lord require of thee but to do justly? Even Hitler had law and order, and he kept a pretty tidy ship. But at what a price? Let's not make mockery of the words that appear in the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shores. Send these the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. We've been proud of that, haven't we? And to hear some people talk previous to this election, they're willing to dash the whole business into the Atlantic. What doth the Lord require of thee but to do justly? Probably be a good thing not only for candidates but for voters as well to go back and have a good lesson in American history and see just what we do stand for in this nation. Might do them good to go back to an event that happened back in 1921. Dr. Holmes and Norman Thomas wanted to test an anti-socialist ordinance. And they took a stand on the street corner of Mount Vernon with another group. Dr. Holmes began to read the Declaration of Independence, and he got to that part that speaks of the right of the people to alter or to abolish their government when they were all arrested. And as they were led away, Dr. Holmes says, but I didn't say that. Thomas Jefferson said that. Well, the policeman said, where is he? We'll get him too. There are many who could use to advantage a refresher course in American history and know just what this Declaration of Independence says and what the Bill of Rights says. And then ask ourselves, are we going to be men and women, or are we going to be just hypocrites? Now, of course, there are other qualities. He should be a man that unites rather than divides and polarizes a people. He must be a man who is big enough to take criticism and a man who is big enough to do things sufficiently big to be criticized. He must, in the words of the psalmist, be the kind of person who's trying to wake the dawn and not just waiting for the sun to come up. And he must be the kind of person who is going to draw good, capable, responsible people to him to help them to do the job. No man can do this task by himself. Remember that great event back in the Old Testament where Moses was always going up to the highest point with his flag, and as the army of the children of Israel saw that flag, they became courageous, and they always won their battles. But this day he was tired, and his arms went down, and the banners went down. But Aaron and Hur saw those banners, and they went over and lifted the arms of Moses. They themselves couldn't be the leader, but they loved the man who was, and they supported. He who's going to be president of this nation that can command this time must be the kind of person that can command the capable persons and their affection. We must give our support when Tuesday is over to that man. You say the little efforts that I make will do no good. They never will prevail to tip the hovering scale where justice hangs in balance. I don't think I ever thought they would. But I'm prejudiced beyond debate in favor of the right to choose which side shall feel the stubborn ounces of my weight. One vote's a pretty important business on Tuesday. If I remember my history correctly, and I don't have it noted down, if I remember correctly, Thomas Jefferson and John Quincy Adams both were elected by the House of Representatives. It had to be thrown into the House. And in both instances, it was one vote that decided. Pretty important business, this vote. No, one isn't sufficient for this day by himself, and I wish that I could see more evidence in our national leaders of seeking for help a little beyond the human. It's not evident in the leaders of any of the parties, and it's regrettable. The view of man held by the founding fathers of this nation had a deeply religious foundation. Rights were God-given. Man was endowed by his Creator. There were natural laws and there were natural rights. And freedom had a distinct relationship to the sacredness of man. That is a great foundation. Just a great beginning. And we become terribly muddled in this whole matter of religion. The First Amendment says Congress shall pass no law respecting an establishment of religion. Now, surely in the light of the historical background of that amendment, this means that there is to be no official state church. But it has come to the place where almost any action by the federal government in support of religion is interpreted as a violation of the First Amendment. Thank God we've still got some people who continue to proclaim the conviction that if our founding fathers were against our federal government having any concern about religion, they were courageous enough to have said so. And they didn't say so. Well, did Norman Goodall make the statement in his book, One Man's Testimony, men may be provided with the means of mastering their environment. They may be able to handle more and more of the resources of this world. They may come to them with an increase of leisure, health, and wealth. They may become more independent. They may be better educated. But with all this, unless the main note to which life is set is one that puts knowledge of God and His will as man's supreme concern, civilization, in fact, may go into retrogression rather than progress. End of quote. He's saying that it's futile to try to build without God. He's saying, don't ever get away from those spiritual foundations, whatever you do. He's saying with the psalmist, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. Wasn't that a great passage that was telling of these American prisoners that were put to the job of building the bridge of death over in Burma? And when they were asked how in the world they ever got the courage to do it, one of the soldiers said that the men got their strength from faith in God, in one's cause, in one's country, and in one's comrades. For the commanding of these times, not only our leaders, but all of us could stand a strong dose of that. Faith in one's God, in one's cause, in one's country, in one's comrades. The hope of this nation is still in faith. God help us if we let our fears take the place of it. It's only through faith in the great principles that this nation under God can have a new birth of freedom. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
This morning's worship service emanated from Shadyside Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh. Ministers of the church are the Reverend Dr. Howard C. Scharfe, the Reverend Dr. James R. Spear, and the Reverend J. Wayne Hanratty. Organist and choir director Russell G. Wickman. Today's sermon by Dr. Scharfe was titled Commanding the Times. Your comments on these services are invited. Listen next Sunday at 11 o'clock for the regular worship service from Shadyside Presbyterian Church, Amberson Avenue and Westminster Place in Pittsburgh.